Okay, we're live from Hong Kong. It's Hong Kong. Welcome, Olivia.
Hi, thanks, Mark.
Good to see you again. And I think I want to first give a shout out to Jean for, I guess, being the good reason for us connecting. So thanks, Jean. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dean.
So best place to start always is if you could briefly, the keyword here being briefly, introduce yourself. Some people tell their whole story and we're done. So who you are, where you're from, a little bit about you, family, stuff like that, and then we'll get into it. How's that?
Okay, great. Sounds good, Mark. So I was born in Hong Kong. I'm currently living and working in Hong Kong. But my family, we immigrated to the US when I was still in elementary school. So effectively, I spent my entire, education in the US. I'm a proud Berkeley graduate, and that's also where I met Jean. And yay, go Bear! And after universities, I moved to Hong Kong to work, which was just in a way by accident. Like any university kids, we were all, when we got out of school, we all just really needed a job, and I applied everywhere. And so, out of the three, and, unlike today, I think, nowadays, people apply to like hundreds of jobs. When I see these kids, I feel really sorry for them. I applied for 3 jobs, and one was actually working for the SWI Group as a management trainee. And then the other was for an insurance company, as an actuary. And then the one more was actually working for a bank. So the insurance company and Swire accepted me. And then I was weighing, going, actuary, going to Hong Kong to work and maybe work around the world. Wow, really difficult choice.
Well, that's
so anyway,
that's a
really, really hard.
No, that's
my goodness. Took me ages to decide, and then so I went back to Hong Kong to work. And like I said, I actually spent pretty much my entire career in the SWI Group, and SWI being a conglomerate. They have many businesses, from aviations to properties to FMCG. So I spent majority of the time in Cathay Pacific. And so with that, I had the awesome privilege of working around the world. I've worked in Malaysia, Singapore, Germany, and the Netherlands, aside from Hong Kong. So that's been great. So actually really recently, just about now a little over 3 months, I left the SWI Group, and I'm now working in MTR. So it's a public transport company, the biggest public transport company in Hong Kong. And so I'm looking after the environmental and social responsibility. So is that brief enough for you?
That's actually quite good. You'll get a gold star later. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And before we go a little bit farther, share with us what is called your why, or whatever you want to call it. But share with us what your why is, and like when did you discover it, and basically why do you do what you do?
Okay, so then, as I said, so right now, I am looking after environmental and social responsibilities for the organizations. And right before I left, my home of many years in Swire, I was actually heading up diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that, for me, is my calling. Although, I didn't really start doing that until about four years or so ago. And, it's interesting when people ask me like, oh, you're so passionate, every time when you talk about this, we can see that you're so enthusiastic. Why is that? And if I have to think back, I think that the writing's almost always been on the wall. As I said, our family, we immigrated to the US when I was still in elementary school. So, I've always, we always grown up in the US. I live in a typical suburb in the US in California. And you grew up in a neighborhood where, for the longest time, our family we're 2 Asian family living there. There was ourselves, so that's, my family. And then, I have a younger sister and a younger brother. And then our neighbor just across the street from us actually is 2 young American-born Chinese couple, and they didn't have any kids, right? So we were the 2 only Asian family in the entire neighborhood. So we're the token, Asian.
The token diversity.
with a token diversity, as if there were such things, back in those days, right? And I think, like when you're growing up, always being the only, kind of being somewhat different from everybody else, and children at times, can be kind of rude, and so, there used to be a lot of tauntings, a lot of name callings. And, growing up, knowing the facts that, we end up having to kind of defend ourselves and stand our ground, and then kind of fighting your way through, and it's difficult. But then at the same time, you also start to appreciate things like allyship. When you have someone out of the blue, without any particular reason, standing up for you and, saying, hey, that's not acceptable. You can't treat her like that, or you can't treat them like that. And so I think, with all that, now that I look back, I think that's kind of how I become really passionate. And then also, as I said, working for Cathay Pacific, I worked around the world, and often I am the only. Either I was the first female country manager, the first Asian country manager, or the first Asian and female country manager. And often, being that kind of first and only, it also taught me a lot in terms of being tolerant, teaching me how to be very respectful, knowing that, at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know everything. None of us know everything.
You don't know everything?
Yeah, no, I know, surprising, isn't it? And I'm from Berkeley, and having the need to embrace the culture that you're being put in, so I appreciate, every time when I moved around the world, that I'm in a completely new culture. And, I am the, I'm just kind of the implant. And so I need to learn to be respectful of the culture that I'm in, but then also not to kind of hide away my own belief and my own culture, my upbringing as well. And so I think, now looking back and, and doing what I do nowadays in terms of really promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, promoting social justice, promoting environmental justice, and, just imploring people to be responsible for what they're given. I think that really is the reason why I do what I do and why I love it, and I get excited and jump out of bed every morning.
Well, you're a lucky person to jump out of bed like that every morning, because that's exactly what people want. And it's interesting because in my journey a little bit, I turned down a dream job with a professional hockey team in Canada. I was a big hockey fan, to go to a nonprofit for less money, but travel around the world and meet leaders. And the person that told me to take that job was the one that offered me the job that was my dream job at the hockey team. And so I started realizing this guy really cares about me if he's telling me to do that. And so I find I always find it fascinating, especially when you said, you felt great about somebody standing up for you and what that means. And at the same token, being able to understand the value, not only the values, but the advantages of the differentiation that we have, rather than concentrate on, well, you're different, that you must have something wrong with you, or whatever. So you kind of, it sounds like you kind of had DEI as a foundation, maybe not even knowing it early on, and then it kind of grew, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think, because, throughout my career, I was always doing either commercial related role or operational role, right? So then, that's, as you start, and you started, working and everything, that's kind of all you think about. You're thinking, okay, how am I going to get better at my job? What's going to be my next role? Like, what's that going to look like? Am I going to be the future CEO? What? Not that I ever thought of that, but then, but it just, just something kind of like that, right? But without realizing it, and I guess now that I have a lot of especially in the last few years reflecting back, often I think one of the most rewarding and yet challenging part of my role was actually working with people, working with your team. How do you get the best out of them? How do you inspire them? How do you want them to be better and more than where they are today? And then also in some ways, and I suppose because of the nature of what I was doing back in those days as a graduate trainee, that you're constantly being rotated around and doing different roles after every few years, that I think one of the important things I learned was that the only way that you can actually get out of what you do right now and move on to something else, there are only two ways. One is that you're so lousy, they're going to want to kick you out and say you are utterly useless, which is not what we want. The other one is that you've done such a great job and you have actually groomed someone along the way that you can anytime walk out of that job and that person can take over. And that's when they say, okay, great. I think it's now, now it's time for her to go and do something else. And so, that was kind of always something that I kind of aim for, is to say, all right, when can I, like now, when am I going to ready to go and move on to something else? And is it going to be fine as soon as I walk out, and then there'll be other people that's going to be super and even better than me to take over that role?
Yeah, it's a little diversion from a question I wanted to ask you, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. Don't you even find that working in different countries, different places, you realize how important the differences are, even with trying different foods and people who react to foods, different music, different things like that, that kind of shake up your brain a little bit, that, wow, this is a different perspective, or this is a different taste that really shook me up and whatnot. Even from those things, you can find some real positives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I have I have to admit, I am a little bit of a picky eater. And so my stomach is not exactly the strongest in the world. But having said that, I have pretty much willing to try almost anything when it comes to the cuisine. There will be some that I find really challenging. Like I remember, when I was working in Europe and I had to go to, I go to the UK quite a bit, and they have the haggis, which is like this spring lamb. I'm sorry. I mean, okay, there's going to be something I stop. But generally, yes, you're absolutely right. I think, when you are being put in a different culture, in many ways, like you do realize that you are kind of, I mean, of course, you can still shelter yourself, and like, I can always go to, like, because you can almost pretty much in any countries around the world, you can find a Chinese restaurant, right?
Yeah.
So if that's what you really want, you can, right? But you would live, I mean, I would, if I did that, I think I would live such a boring life, and then I wouldn't learn to appreciate. And then also, I think it is by venturing out and appreciate different food, like talking to different people, different culture, it kind of really opens yourself up, right? And at that point, it's like, wow, there are all these amazing, people and amazing experience out there. How do I get the most out of that, and I can absorb it, so then somehow in some ways, as I move along, that I can find ways to apply all of that or share all of that with other people.
Well,
So I think, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, the sharing is a good example there, because bringing how many people come together over food and things like, and music and things like that. It's a great way to support inclusion. So along those lines, in our business, we trademark the term leaders who care, and we look to work with leaders who care, because it's been clear to us that the business or the leaders of businesses have recognized that their business will do much better when they're doing good out there. And good includes being diverse and all that stuff. So I found that I want to hear from you if you found this too, and how you handle it. I found candidates have asked for proof of how business leaders care now. So, for example, women especially will say, I know I can do the job, my qualifications are there, but are you going to really, for real, allow me to be on the biggest project you have? Are you going to allow me to fail, succeed, go through the process, etc., get recognized for it? Or am I going to be, looked at as too ambitious, let's say, for a woman type of thing? And that question, not only women, comes up with all people from all different colors and whatnot, but I find it a lot with women. And so what I want to know is, have you found that also? And how do you make it equal opportunity for people? You don't want to just put a woman on because they're a woman, nor do they want that if they're good. So it's a balancing act. So long question, but how do you look at that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, that's a question that I get asked very often, both genuine question, like what you just asked me in terms of, it is as a concern, and those kind of like, often you get sort of flippant questions, oh, so, that's great, you're a woman, that means you're going to be my boss in the future, because that's why they hire you. Kind of going, okay, if that's what you think, then you think very little of this company. So I think at the end of the day, I would argue that firstly is that we always try to make it really clear, especially in the work that I do every day, is that it is not about giving, like, we're not tossing things like competencies and skills and, you know, capabilities, all of these things. We're not tossing that out the door, you know. I mean, like, that is still really key. You can't do the job. You can't do the job. It doesn't matter, you know, in terms of what kind of background you come from, right? And it's not because, oh, we're trying to, you know, equalize a few, so I'm just going to, you know, kind of hire unqualified people. You know, I mean, I think that's quite insulting when people say these kind of things. You know, you just really have a lot of disrespect for the organizations. You know, now, you know, maybe some are like that. I don't know, you know, but at least none that I know of, you know, that are like that. And so I think one of the first thing that I would say is that I always start with the things that's the most unsexy, which is kind of the policies. Because, you know, often people say, well, you know, policy doesn't shape behavior. You're right, absolutely. It doesn't shape behavior, but without the right policies, you have no foundations to stand on. You can't actually say that, you know, like if you don't have a policies that really promote in terms of fairness, in terms of equity, you know, I like to use the words equity versus equality, you know, have equities and, you know, promote it in such a way that, you know, people do feel that, yeah, like, you know, like flexible working or parental leave, that where that, yeah, you know, there's a policy in place that will help me to thrive or to help me when I need that kind of support. So I think policies becomes really key. And so that usually is one of the first things that I work on when I actually start roles around diversity, equity, inclusion, is looking at the proper policies. Then I think it's really to build that kind of awareness, because, you know, people often say like, oh, you know, I mean, you know, you kind of assume, and people like myself, you know, I always said like, you know, because I'm such a passionate advocate, that I think everybody understands what DEI and now belonging and all these kind of, you know, the alphabet, you know, the alphabet soup, what it all means, right? But it's not true, you know, because, you know, that's not people do every day. Why do you expect, I mean, I don't understand physics, you know, chemistry things, you know, it's like, why do you expect me to understand that? That's not my thing. And then, so then I think building that awareness becomes really important, because people are not going to know, you know, what to do if they don't understand what you're talking about.
Sure.
So I think, you know, after having that policies, I try to do and build a lot of, you know, in terms of awareness, then looking at educations, you know, looking at different trainings. Again, training is not a panacea. It's not, doesn't mean that just because you've been trained about unconscious bias, you suddenly stop being biased. Again, right. It's just simply reminding yourself that, hey, you know, we are all human beings and we are biased because of our upbringings, you know, of our experience, but just simply being aware of it. And so, you know, having that kind of educations, I think is really key. Then I would say, like, you know, it's creating those kind of networks. So we try to create different network within the organizations. Of course, you know, most companies start with women's network, they build allyships, you know, they have LGBTQ plus network, you know, even parents network, you know, and, you know, parents with children network, all kinds of network. And the idea really is that you try to bring people together that will probably have similar challenges. Mm-hmm. And then have them have a comfortable conversations, a place that where they can kind of share and feel safe, but then also exchange, you know, views, sharing again. I think it's really key. And then, you know, and then it's creating also, you know, a safe space within the organization, especially within, you know, different departments, you know, where people feel that if there are issues that comes up, that they can actually come to those safe space and they know that they will be heard. Doesn't mean that all of their problems will be, you know, solved, right? But then at least they feel that there's a place that I can tell you what's happening and they will be heard. And then, you know, I think ultimately as a company and then as every individual leaders, and I think even every individual to set some kind of KPIs that are actually going to say that what is it I'm going to do? What is it the organization's going to do? You know, the department heads or the leaders and the individuals going to do to create a place that is really inclusive. And so, you know, and I think it's by doing all of these, and it sounds like there's a lot of step, and, you know, sometimes it's, you know, you may do something earlier than others, but I think ultimately by doing all of this, you hope that you are creating a space and where people can say, okay, yeah, I can see that you are really trying to do something to equalize the playing field and to really work with those that are underrepresented.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great points in there. And I think I'd like to know what if you had any experiences of seeing that impact actually go down from the individual to their family, obviously into the business, but even down to their family and thus even into the community, which ends up coming back to the business. I give the example a lot of times where, you know, parents would come home from work and they'd either say, oh my God, it sucked. It was so tired. Give me a beer. I'm just going to sit on the couch, whatever. Or, man, do you want to hear what happened at work today? And I mean, on the dinner table, even with their kids, because then the kids are getting impacted about what's going on rather than work was terrible. Do you ever have the ability to see how far that impact goes down, even into the family and community?
Yeah, I'll share a story. And then I think that, she's now my friend. She used to work, with me. I mean, she's probably going to kill me, but I always tell her that because I love her story, because her story inspires me as well. So I think, when we talk about individuals, so, so when I first started my, D&I journey in my previous company, nobody was doing it. And it was a completely new role. It was literally created, out of thin air. So, I started as one. So I was the only person in the entire organization that actually has a full-time job is doing DEI. And so, I immediately had to go and, okay, I probably need to go and have someone to, help me. And so, one of my first colleague that works with me in the department was someone that used to be my executive assistant when I was recruiting graduate trainee for the group. And so she worked with me for a couple of years, brilliant, and we had a great time. And clearly she enjoyed working with me. So then when I left and did various roles before I come back to DE&I, she was still, working in the SMI group as an EA for other directors. And so, so when I started my role, she came to me, and then so she said, oh, it's great. I'm so happy that now you're back, you're doing this job. I love it if I can, come and work for you again. I said, okay, great. So I asked her, questions around why she's passionate about DE&I, and asked her to really think about it. And I did say one thing to her, and we laugh about it now, even still. And I said to her that if you will come and work for me and do this role, I would guarantee that you will never go back and be somebody's, executive assistants or whatever. D&I will become your calling. It will become your profession,
Mm-hmm.
So she goes, oh, great, So she started working with me as an officer, so we slowly built the team, she did. And then so, and we built from the two of us to then become a team of 4. And, in a way, it is still a relatively small team for a big organizations, but then, we have grown basically within a couple of years, 100%, And during that time, she picked up different parts. She became, she was always passionate about people with disabilities. That was kind of her D&I passion, right? So, she started, she did a lot of research. It was something that was very personal to her. And, and she started from, just doing a lot of research to then, I start making her go out and talk about it, share it, because that's her passion. And so, from the very beginning, she was a little bit hesitant to a point at where she becomes kind of our go-to person when it comes to anything around people with disability. And it was interesting when you talk about family, right? So then I know her husband as well, and so she used to laugh and say her husband worked in a different organizations, super, super smart IT guy, And so, and I have, we always have a lot of IT questions, go, oh, how do we do this? This is so odd, And so whenever I ask these IT questions, oh, go and ask your husband, see what, And then so she was like, what? I said, my husband, when I used to in the old days, when I have my other colleagues ask him about IT things, he was like, oh, go and ask your own IT department. But you are the only one that my husband, always will be willing to help, because, he always said that, I'm now so excited and I'm so happy when I go back home, that he felt that you really, kind of changed me. I'm going, okay, hey, whatever works, I just have an IT problem.
No, but you know what? That's a great example. And that's what I'm talking about. I don't think we necessarily always realize the impact it can make trickling down, even, and the kids see all the time too, not just the spouse, and it's compared to their the other kids that they know. And so I think the impact sometimes it's not even measured enough how important it is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Beyond just the DEI or the ERG group or whatever. So that's a great story, and I hope she's okay with you using it, because I'm going to use it now too.
Oh yeah. Oh no. And then, so she's actually now went and worked for a different company, but even in a bigger role, promoting D&I on a regional level. So I'm super proud of her. So I think then now that kind of gives you the community as well. We have expanded our community of D&I people that go into other organizations.
Well, you know what they say, legacy is watching all the people that your assistants or coworkers or whatnot go on to bigger and better things, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what a good leader, or like you said, leader who cares. That's how it should happen.
Now you're talking. Good job. Hey, my grandparents, probably all grandparents, they were from Kiev actually, as were my mom and my aunt as well. And they would always say, as long as you, with an accent, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing, And then they said education, obviously, but it was the health, and it wasn't like branding or a slogan. It was from real life experience that is the most important. With everything that's gone on, we talked about quarantines and pandemic and everything the last few years. Have you seen in your world there an awakening, for lack of a better word, about what's important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea that there are now more people talking about not just DNI and ESG, so the two kind of sometimes being thrown around, like sort of interchangeably. So the DNI is part of S, I always said, and talking about this sort of, climate change, environmental justice, all of these things. So I think that the awareness is definitely there. Now, are people woke? That word is always like kind of, loaded, so I don't want to use that. But I think, are people more aware? Absolutely. Does it seem like people care more? Absolutely. Are people doing more about it? I'm not sure yet. The jury is still out.
Sure.
I think that we need to see, how after being aware of it, after talking more about it, what will be the actions? What are people going to do next? So I think, yeah, I'm absolutely seeing a lot of this in terms of, in the last couple of years. And I think especially with, the pandemic, and then, with the quarantine, people being locked away, and feeling that sense of, so I mean, is it being more equal, because now maybe everybody is on screen. So, for people, it's almost kind of like, if I have to be, for people that would have had sort of family responsibilities, and because now everybody's working from home, maybe some will be easier to manage. So maybe it's become more equal. Some is even more challenging to manage, so becomes less equal. And so then those are kind of questions that I think, we do have to ask around. But I think in terms of the awareness, absolutely. I think a lot more people are aware of it. A lot more people are asking, in terms of, especially the younger generations, again, like, I don't like to generalize, but usually, those that are, the Gen Z, the millennials, and you see a lot of surveys will tell you that when they go and work for an organizations, sure, like financial security is still one of the key, especially what's happening in the last couple of years. But, they do kind of think about is that if they're going to stay with a company, they want to know what the company is doing around climate change, what is their responsibility, but also, is the company looking at diversity, equity, inclusion? Are they promoting an inclusive workplace? And so for those companies that actually are doing that, there is a more likelihood that they will stay longer, more than 5 years. And I know 5 years doesn't sound like a lot, but hey, for that generation, 5 years is like a lifetime.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I think that absolutely, I'm seeing an impact around that.
No, that's good to hear, because we're seeing it a lot too, and that's kind of why we talk about leaders who care, because it actually is good for business. So last thing I want to ask you on this part, because I know with your passion we can go on for a long time, which would be fun. So we'd have to do like we say in LA, we have to leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel, basically. Yeah. So 2021, a client told me about 2020. He said, Mark, 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a great way to describe it. So now it feels like sometimes like it was yesterday and years ago. It's kind of like a big blend. But now that we're going into almost 2023, what are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
Well, I mean, like, I know it's going to be like, oh, such a cliche, but I am grateful for my family and my health, because especially with the pandemic, you kind of think it's life, it's quite fragile. And so I am super grateful, my parents are healthy, and, they are, still, moving about. And, I'm grateful for my family, for my niece and my nephews, like they're crazy kids. I mean, I'm grateful I had a chance to go and see them, at least, even with the lockdown and everything, in the US. So that I'm super grateful for. I think what I'm grateful for is that I think, with the pandemic, I think people are more empathetic. I think people are more compassionate, because we almost kind of all got stuck in the same boat in some ways. Yes, there are still some anomaly out there, the super crazy rich, I don't know how that happens. But then, there are generally, I think we all kind of stuck in the same boat. And I think that I see more compassion and empathy. And because it's been carrying on, it's starting to wear thin, but I'm hoping, and I'm super hopeful that people will hold on to that compassion and that empathy, that they will then, when we all kind of walk out of here, they don't kind of go back to like, oh, life as normal, whatever that happens means, but actually think about, what more can they do? What more can we do for other people? How can we support others? How can we check on everyone, make sure everybody's all right, and then also recognizing each of us have our own privilege, and how do we then use that privilege to support other people? So that is what I'm really hopeful, that we hold on to that compassion and empathy.
That's a great message to put out there, because it basically helps everybody by doing that. And so, we need to smile more at people, laugh more with people, etc.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I'm super hopeful now that the world's going to do much better with you as being one of the leaders who care. So
well, thank you. Very kind of you.
You convinced me, and I really appreciate you being on this series and sharing. So thanks a million.
Well, thank you, Mark, for having me and allowing me to share my passion.
And you did it well. So congratulations.
Thank you.